The real reason angel numbers suddenly stop appearing. You checked the time and the numbers weren't there. Not that morning, not the afternoon before. You tried to remember the last time you saw them, 11:11, 2:22, 444, and realized you couldn't. At some point, without warning, they stopped. No final sequence. No goodbye. Just absence where there used to be something. And something shifted in you when you noticed. It wasn't panic exactly. It was quieter than that. A kind of background unease, like a sound you didn't know you were hearing until it went silent. You had started to trust those numbers without consciously deciding to. They felt like confirmation, like something was watching, aligned, moving with you. And now that feeling is gone. You've probably told yourself it doesn't mean anything, that you're just not noticing. But you are noticing. You're noticing the absence. That's what brought you here. Here's the first layer of the answer stated plainly. Angel numbers stop appearing when the guidance they were offering has been received. Not withdrawn, not removed, completed. The signal served its purpose, and your awareness has moved to a new frequency. But that explanation, as true as it is, only scratches the surface. Because the real reason they stopped is not about the numbers at all. It's about what happened inside you while you were watching them. The silence you weren't prepared for. You didn't notice it happening. That's the part nobody talks about. There was no final number, no farewell sequence. One day they were there, and then, quietly, they weren't. You kept looking, not obsessively, but in that soft, habitual way you look for something you've come to expect. The clock at 11:11, the license plate, the total on a receipt. The pattern you used to catch without even trying. You'd glance at your phone mid-conversation, half expecting it. It wasn't there. Nothing. And the strange part isn't the absence itself. It's what the absence did to you. It unsettled something you didn't know was settled. You had built a quiet architecture of reassurance around those numbers without realizing you were building it. They had become a kind of invisible scaffolding. Not loud, not dramatic. Just there. Holding something up. Now you're feeling the weight of what they were holding. This is the part most people don't admit out loud. That the silence feels like loss. That something which was never officially yours still managed to feel like it was. You didn't choose to depend on those signs. You just did. Gradually, naturally, the way you depend on any small thing that keeps telling you everything is going to be okay. A song that always seems to play at the right moment. A friend who always texts back. A pattern that always showed up when you needed it most. And now it has stopped telling you that. What you're feeling right now isn't irrational. It's the exact response to losing a source of comfort you didn't fully register as a source of comfort until it was gone. Psychologists call this a background anchor, something that stabilizes your emotional state so quietly that you only discover its function through its absence. You didn't know how much weight it was carrying until you felt it shift back onto you. The numbers were anchoring you, and you are only now learning that. But here is what matters. The scaffolding doesn't disappear because the building collapsed. It disappears because the building no longer needs it. Those are two completely different situations, and that distinction changes everything about what this silence means. One is loss. The other is completion. What you are living through right now is the second one, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. What you were actually receiving. Most people think angel numbers are confirmations, signs that say, yes, you're on the right path, keep going. And they are that. But that's not all they are, and it's not even the most important thing they do. What those numbers were actually doing was far more precise. Every time you noticed 444 on a difficult morning, or 111 at the exact moment you were doubting yourself, something happened in your nervous system before any interpretation entered your mind. You paused. You became present. You stepped out of the stream of your own anxious thinking for just a moment, and something in you went quiet. The mental noise dropped. Your breath changed. For a brief instant, you were simply here. That pause was the real gift. Not the meaning you assigned afterward, not the message. The interruption itself. The brief, involuntary moment of attention that the number pulled from you before your mind had time to spin a story around it. Before you could catastrophize or minimize or interpret, you simply noticed. And in that noticing, something reset. You were being trained, in the most gentle possible way, to notice, to interrupt the automatic, to recognize that the present moment contains information your habitual thinking tends to run past. Most of us live several seconds behind the present at all times, processing what just happened rather than experiencing what is happening. The numbers were pulling you back, again and again, without drama, without demand. Angel numbers are, in this sense, attention calibrators. They don't just confirm your path. They gradually rewire how you relate to the present. They teach you, repetition by repetition, to catch the signal inside the noise, to stop, to breathe, to trust that this moment, however ordinary, contains something worth paying attention to. And here is where it gets important. That rewiring takes time. It requires repetition. You need to see the pattern enough times, in enough different emotional contexts, that the response becomes embedded. Not a reaction, a reflex. A built-in capacity rather than a triggered response. Once the reflex is embedded, the training wheels have done their job. The question is no longer whether you can notice. You already notice. The question is what you do with what you notice. And that is a far more demanding kind of attention. One that can't be triggered by a number on a clock. One that has to come from inside you, initiated by you, sustained by you, trusted by you. The numbers stopped because the lesson landed. You may not feel like it did, but something in you received it. The capacity was built. The deeper layers of what that means are only beginning to become visible. The moment the signal shifts, there is a specific internal threshold that precedes the silence. Most people cross it without knowing. They don't announce it to themselves. They don't mark the date. But something in them changes, and the numbers begin to fade almost immediately afterward. It is not a dramatic threshold. It doesn't feel like an awakening or a breakthrough. It feels quieter than that. More like a settling. Like something that had been slightly off-center finally finding its place. It tends to happen at a point where a person has been through enough uncertainty, enough searching, enough sitting with the unknown, that they stop asking the question they started with. Not because they found the answer, but because the question lost its urgency. Because they found, somewhere along the way, a kind of basic tolerance for not knowing. A capacity to exist inside uncertainty without needing to resolve it before taking the next step. That tolerance is the threshold. Before it, the numbers appear because there is a gap they can fill. A moment of doubt where something external can interrupt the spiral. A moment of grief where something outside the self can suggest continuity. A moment of fear where something beyond the mind can offer a brief, stabilizing reference point. The signal finds the gap and enters it. It needs that opening to be received. After the threshold, the gap is smaller. The internal ground has firmed. There are still doubts, still uncertainties, still moments of disorientation. But the person is no longer in free fall the way they were. They have developed something the numbers were helping them develop. A baseline stability that doesn't require constant external confirmation to function. A floor that holds even when everything above it feels uncertain. And that stability, quietly and without ceremony, closes the gap the numbers use to enter. This is not a loss of sensitivity. It is not spiritual numbness. It is the opposite. It is the beginning of a more interior form of awareness, one that doesn't need to be triggered from the outside because it has learned to activate from within. The instrument didn't break. It moved inside. The signal shifted because you shifted. That is the only reason. When the teacher leaves the room, there is an old pattern in every tradition of learning. The teacher who is most essential to your growth is also the one who prepares you for their own departure. The best teachers teach themselves out of necessity. Their deepest goal is not to be needed. It is to become unnecessary. This is uncomfortable to accept when you're in the middle of it, because when the teacher leaves, it rarely feels like graduation. It feels like abandonment. It feels like you did something wrong, or that the relationship meant less than you thought it did, or that you were not important enough to keep. The emotional experience of being left by something that helped you is not pride. It is loss. It is quiet, unannounced, and surprisingly heavy. But the leaving is the teaching. Every spiritual tradition that takes guidance seriously also takes its withdrawal seriously. The Sufi masters called it fana, the dissolution of the guide into the guided. The Zen tradition speaks of killing the Buddha when you meet him on the road. In Jungian psychology, the loss of the external symbol marks the beginning of its integration as an internal archetype. The point is always the same. The external teacher must eventually become an internal principle, or the teaching has failed. Dependence that never transforms into capacity is not growth. It is prolonged reliance. The numbers were never meant to stay. That was always part of their design. They appeared at a time when you needed something outside yourself to interrupt your patterns and restore your orientation. They did exactly that, precisely and repeatedly, for exactly as long as you needed them to. And now, they are doing something equally important, something that requires their absence. They are asking you to locate inside yourself what you used to find in them: the reassurance, the recognition, the sense of alignment. Those things are not gone. They have moved. They are no longer being handed to you from the outside. They are being asked for from the inside. And the only way to discover whether you can generate them internally is to stop receiving them externally. The hand that kept giving has opened, not to take something away, but to show you what you're now holding on your own. That is not punishment. That is the next lesson. The fear beneath the silence. If you are honest with yourself, there is something underneath the confusion, something the confusion is protecting you from looking at directly, something that sits below the surface of your questions about why the numbers stopped, or what you did wrong, or when they might return. It is the fear that the connection was never real, that the numbers were coincidence, that you assigned meaning to patterns that had no meaning, that the comfort you felt was something you manufactured for yourself out of a need to feel less alone in your own life, that you were, in the end, just seeing what you wanted to see. This fear doesn't announce itself clearly. It disguises itself as skepticism, or as the practical voice that tells you to stop reading into things. It mimics reason, but if you trace it far enough back, you find something more tender than skepticism. You find the terrifying possibility that the guidance you trusted was never guidance at all, that the whole architecture of meaning you built around those moments was only yours, that nothing was ever actually responding to you. Sit with that for a moment, not to confirm it, but to feel it clearly. Let it be fully present, without immediately arguing against it. Because this fear is important, not because it's true, but because of what it reveals about you. The intensity of this fear is proportional to how much the connection mattered. You would not be afraid that it wasn't real if part of you was not deeply certain that it was. You cannot grieve something that never mattered. You cannot feel abandoned by something that was never present. The fear is, paradoxically, evidence of the very thing it's questioning. The skepticism is not your truest response to the silence. It is a defense against grief. And grief only visits what was genuinely meaningful. Here is what is actually true. Meaning is not diminished by the mechanism through which it arrives. A number on a clock is a simple thing. What happened in you when you noticed it was not simple at all? The shift in your attention, the brief interruption of your anxiety, the quiet feeling of being held by something larger than your current problem. Those were real. They happened in your nervous system, in your emotional body, in your interior life. They changed the quality of your days. They changed the way you made certain decisions. The question of whether something outside you arranged those moments is one you may never be able to answer with certainty. But the moments themselves are not in question. They happened. They changed you. They still inform how you move through the world. That is not nothing. That is the entire point. What synchronicity looks like now. The numbers were your introduction to a broader language. They were the most legible form of it. Clear, repetitive, easy to recognize. Like learning an alphabet before learning to read sentences. Or like a language course that begins with simple, concrete nouns before introducing complex grammar. The numbers were the simple nouns. But the language didn't end with the numbers. Synchronicity continues. It always does. What changes is the form it takes and the level of attention required to receive it. After the numbers fade, guidance tends to become subtler, more integrated into the texture of daily life, less like flashing signals and more like a consistent resonance that runs underneath events. Less like a neon sign and more like a compass needle, still pointing, but requiring you to be still enough to notice. You might notice it now as a conversation that finds you at exactly the right moment, carrying exactly the words you needed, without the other person knowing why. A book falling open to the exact page you needed. A feeling of sudden clarity that arrives without a clear external cause in the middle of a quiet morning, with no obvious trigger. A decision that feels aligned not because anything confirmed it, but because something inside you simply knows. And the knowing doesn't waver when you press on it. These are not lesser forms of synchronicity. They are more advanced ones. They require a more developed receiver. You cannot catch them with the same passive, ambient attention that caught the numbers. They require a quieter mind, a more present body, a willingness to trust internal signals that carry no external verification, no timestamp, no sequence, just resonance. This is the harder practice. The numbers were easy to notice because they were designed to break through noise. What comes after them is designed to reward silence. It meets you in the spaces between thoughts, not in the middle of them. You are being asked to become someone who can hear what the numbers were pointing toward without needing the numbers to point. That is a significant shift. It doesn't happen overnight, and for a long time, it will feel like receiving less. It is, in fact, receiving differently. The bandwidth is the same. The signal has simply changed frequency, and the antenna you need to receive it has already been built. Through every moment you paused, every time you noticed, every number that pulled your attention back to the present. The new language you're learning. There is a reason this transition feels disorienting. It is not just the loss of the numbers. It is the loss of the clarity they provided. Numbers are unambiguous. 444 appears, and whatever you feel in that moment feels confirmed. The feedback was immediate, concrete, and external. There was no room for doubt about whether you received the signal. You saw it. It was there. What replaces that is none of those things. Internal guidance is slow to develop trust. It doesn't give you a number. It gives you a feeling. And feelings are easy to second guess. They are easy to mistake for wishful thinking or for fear dressed up as intuition, or for the echo of something you already wanted to believe. They don't come with timestamps. They don't repeat themselves on cue. They arrive quietly, and if you dismiss them, they don't argue. Learning to distinguish genuine inner knowing from emotional noise is one of the most demanding skills a person can develop. It requires you to be honest with yourself in ways that external signs never required. A number can't be distorted by your own bias. Your interpretation of a feeling absolutely can be. You can talk yourself into certainty about a feeling. You cannot talk yourself into seeing 11:11 on a clock that reads 11:14. This is why the transition feels like loss of clarity rather than gain. You are not losing guidance. You are losing certainty. And those two things feel identical until you understand the difference between them. Certainty was always a small and temporary gift. It felt like safety, but it was more like a pause in the uncertainty, not the absence of it. Guidance is something different. It doesn't always feel certain. It often feels like a quiet pull in a direction you can't fully justify. It feels like the absence of resistance more than the presence of confirmation. It feels like ease where there could have been friction, like a door that opens without you having to push. You are learning to navigate by a different instrument, one that is built into you rather than found outside you, one that requires your participation rather than your observation. The calibration takes time. The discomfort of that calibration is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something is being built, something more durable, more intimate, and more yours than any external sign could ever be. Trust the building, even when you cannot see the structure yet. What the numbers were protecting you from. This is the part that requires the most honesty. There is a way in which the numbers, for all the genuine good they did, also served as a buffer, Between you and a confrontation you were not yet ready to have. Between you and a question that, if you sat with it long enough without distraction or comfort or confirmation, would require a real answer. Not a sign. An answer. One that comes from you, not to you. The question is different for each person, but it tends to involve something you have been circling rather than entering. A decision you keep framing as still forming, even though some part of you made it months ago. A truth about yourself or your life that the signs were, in some subtle way, allowing you to keep approaching without arriving. A direction you've been moving toward while telling yourself you're still deciding. The numbers provided enough reassurance to keep moving, but not always enough discomfort to stop and settle. They could confirm motion. What they couldn't do, what nothing external can do, is require you to be still. To stop long enough to let what you already know surface fully. This is not a criticism. It is a description of how comfort functions. Comfort allows forward motion. It reduces friction. It makes the unbearable survivable. These are not small gifts, but there are certain thresholds that cannot be crossed in motion. They require stillness. They require sitting in the absence of reassurance long enough to discover what is actually there. Underneath the movement, underneath the seeking, underneath the quiet need for something to keep confirming that everything is okay. The silence may be asking you to stop moving and actually arrive somewhere, not at a destination, at a truth, something you have been near for a long time, something the numbers kept gently suggesting without ever forcing you to face directly. They pointed. They confirmed. But they never demanded you stop and look. The silence is demanding that now. You likely already know what the truth is. It tends to be the thing you think about right before you fall asleep and push away before it fully forms. The thing that surfaces in quiet moments and gets covered quickly by distraction. It is the thing the numbers kept pointing toward without ever quite saying out loud. The silence is saying it now, not with words, with space, with the kind of stillness that makes it impossible to keep pretending you haven't heard. The threshold you already crossed. Here is the realization that changes the texture of this entire experience. The stopping of the numbers does not mark a transition that is coming. It marks one that has already happened. You are not approaching a threshold. You crossed it. The silence is the confirmation of the crossing, not the invitation to begin. The door is not ahead of you. You walked through it. You are already on the other side. Something in you completed a cycle, an internal reorganization, a shift in the way you orient toward your own life, a change in the baseline from which you operate. It may not have felt dramatic from the inside. These completions rarely do. They tend to feel more like things settling than like things arriving, more like a quiet exhale than a sudden revelation. You might have noticed it as a period of unusual calm, or an unexpected shift in what worried you, or a decision that came easier than you expected it to. But the evidence is in the silence itself. The numbers stopped because the part of you they were speaking to has matured past the need for that particular form of communication. The receiver changed, and because the receiver changed, the signal adjusted. Not disappeared, adjusted, evolved, moved to a register that matches where you are now, rather than where you were when this began. Think about what you were like when the numbers first appeared, the level of uncertainty you were living with, the quality of your relationship to your own inner life, the degree to which you trusted anything at all, yourself, the path, the possibility that things were moving in a direction that had meaning. Think about the questions that kept you up at night. Think about how much of your energy went toward simply surviving the not knowing. Now compare. You are not the same person. The changes may be quiet, unannounced, impossible to point to in a single moment, but they are real and they are substantial. You have crossed distances you cannot fully see from where you now stand, because you are standing on the other side of them. The vantage point has changed. You are looking back at terrain you already traversed without realizing how far you traveled. The silence is not an ending. It is a marker. It says, you made it to here. Now the next part begins. Living without the confirmation. The practical question is this. How do you move forward without the external validation you came to rely on? And it is a real question, not a small one, not one that dissolves simply by understanding it intellectually. You can know with complete clarity that you have graduated past the need for external signs and still feel, viscerally, the absence of them. Understanding doesn't immediately replace the felt sense of something missing. That takes time. That takes practice. The honest answer is that you develop a different relationship with uncertainty. Not a comfortable one, not immediately, but a workable one. One that does not require resolution before action or confirmation before trust. One that can move forward on the basis of inner alignment rather than outer validation. This means learning to act on partial information and to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing whether you're right. It means making decisions that feel aligned without having anything outside yourself tell you they are. It means sitting with the exposure of trusting yourself, fully, without a safety net of signs, and staying there long enough to discover that you don't collapse. It means, in the most fundamental sense, becoming your own first authority on your own life. This is harder than it sounds, because the numbers, among other things, allowed you to defer that authority, to feel guided without fully owning the guidance, to feel certain without fully earning the certainty. There was always something else confirming the decision, something that gave you permission to trust what you already sensed. Owning it is different. It carries more weight. The decisions feel more exposed. The path feels less confirmed. There is no number to arrive at the exact moment you're doubting yourself and quietly say, yes, this. You have to say it yourself, and then live with having said it. But there is something on the other side of that exposure that the numbers could never give you. A relationship with your own inner knowing that does not depend on anything outside yourself to function. A form of trust that has been tested without external support and has held. A confidence that is not borrowed from a sign, but built from experience. That is a different kind of certainty, quieter, more durable, and entirely yours. You are not going to find that trust by waiting for the signs to return. You are going to find it by taking the next step without them, and then the next, and discovering, slowly, and then undeniably, that the ground is still there. What comes after the signs? There is a kind of person who no longer needs the numbers, not because they stopped believing, but because they stopped needing confirmation to believe. The belief became structural. It stopped being something they held and became something they moved from. That is a different kind of faith entirely. This is where you are being invited. It is not a place of certainty. It never becomes that. The uncertainty doesn't resolve. It never fully does for anyone who is living honestly and paying attention. What changes is your relationship to it. You stop requiring it to resolve before you can feel at peace. You stop treating the unknown as a problem to be solved and begin treating it as the medium in which a meaningful life actually takes place. The uncertainty becomes familiar, not comfortable exactly, but livable. Even at times, interesting. The signs were, in their own way, training you for this. Every time you noticed a number and felt the quiet settling that followed, you were practicing something. You were practicing the experience of trust, of briefly releasing the grip of your own anxious interpretation and allowing something else to carry you for a moment, of choosing, even for a few seconds, to believe that what was happening had direction and meaning, even when the evidence was ambiguous. You practiced it enough times that it began to live in you, not as a belief you hold, as a posture you carry, a default orientation toward your own life that doesn't require constant renewal because it has become part of the structure. What comes after the signs is not silence. What comes after the signs is you, carrying what they taught you, moving through a life that is still full of meaning, still threaded through with moments of strange alignment and unexpected recognition, conversations that arrive too perfectly to be purely accidental, decisions that unfold more easily than they should, mornings that feel like confirmation of something you can't quite name. But now those moments confirm something in you that is already stable, rather than creating stability you don't otherwise have. They find you standing rather than reaching. You don't need the numbers to be guided. You never did. What you needed was to learn to trust the part of you that already knows. That learning took the form of numbers for a time, clear, repetitive, unmistakable. Now it takes the form of your own life, fully inhabited, fully present, no longer waiting for a sign to tell you you're in the right place. You are already in the right place. You have been for longer than you know. The silence has been trying to tell you that from the beginning, and now, finally, you are still enough to hear it.